3 years ago, I paid $2 for a single knob of ginger at the grocery store. I put it in one 5 gallon bucket on my deck. Last fall, I pulled more than 4 pounds of fresh ginger out of that same bucket, and I have never bought ginger since. Here is the part that bothers me. This method was common knowledge once. The spice importers who controlled the ginger trade had every reason to keep it tropical, exotic, something you bought and never grew. So the home grower instructions quietly disappeared. I tested the old method against everything modern advice told me, and the old way won. Stay with me to the end, because there is one thing you must do at harvest: leave a specific piece behind, or the bucket never refills. Here is what most people never learn. Ginger was once an ordinary thing to grow at home in this country. Not exotic, not tropical. Just another crop you started in spring, the same way you started a potato. I want to be specific about who changed that, because vague villains are how you end up sounding like a crank. The force here was the consolidated spice importing houses that ran out of the Atlantic ports in the early 1900s. Their whole business depended on ginger arriving by ship from Jamaica and from Asia. A crop you buy by the pound over and over is a good crop for an import trade. A crop you grow once and keep forever is a terrible one. Now, here is the anchor. And you can check this yourself. Pull up American seed and nursery catalogues from before 1910. Ginger rhizomes are right there, listed for home planting, sitting in the same pages as seed potatoes. Then look at the catalogues from the 1920s after the import trade consolidated. The listings are gone. Ginger had been quietly reframed as a tropical thing you could only buy. I found this the way I find most of what I test. I was digging through old garden bulletins and catalogues one winter, and I kept seeing ginger treated as a normal home crop. That did not match a single modern grow guide I owned. So I decided to test the old instructions in my own buckets. Here is what it cost the rest of us. Fresh ginger runs $4 to $6 a pound. Most people buy a new $2 knob every time they cook, use a thumb of it, and toss the shriveled remainder a week later. Year after year, decades of it. The knowledge did not die because it stopped working. It died because it stopped being printed. And the one method that mattered is the one I am about to walk you through. So let us start with what the thing actually is, because the first mistake is right there in the name. That knob you buy at the store is not a root. It is a rhizome, a live underground stem. And a stem has growth eyes on it, little nodes, same as the eyes on a seed potato. That is the whole secret the old catalogues understood, and the modern grocery aisle wants you to forget. You are not buying a dead spice. You're buying a living plant that has been sitting dormant under fluorescent lights. Now, here's the first thing I had to figure out, and I got it wrong the first time. Store ginger is treated to keep it from sprouting on the shelf. There is a natural sprout inhibitor in the skin, and the suppliers like it that way. A knob that sprouts in your kitchen is a knob you might plant. So before that rhizome goes anywhere near soil, I soak it 24 hours in plain warm water. That strips the inhibitor off and wakes the plant up. The first season I tested this, I skipped the soak, planted a fresh knob straight into the bucket and waited 6 weeks for nothing. Soaked the next one. It pushed a green shoot in 18 days. Then the bucket. One 5-gallon bucket, the cheap kind with 4 or 5 drainage holes drilled in the bottom. Ginger will rot in standing water faster than almost anything I grow. I fill it with a light mix, not heavy garden soil. About half finished compost, half quiet and polite, so it holds moisture but drains free and stays loose. Loose matters, and you'll see why in a minute. I lay the soaked rhizome down flat, growth eyes facing up, and I cover it with just 1 to 2 inches of that mix. Shallow, not deep. Most modern guides tell you to bury it 3 or 4 inches, and that is the first place the old way and the new way part company, and that shallow planting is exactly the kind of detail that fell out of the printed record once nobody was selling rhizomes to home growers anymore. All right, let us keep going, because the why behind that shallow planting is the part that explains how this knowledge survived at all. Ginger is not a desert plant, and it is not a sun worshipper. In the wild, it is a tropical understory plant. It grows on the floor of the forest, in the dappled shade under taller trees, and it spreads horizontally. The rhizome creeps along just below the surface, not down into the dark. So when you bury it deep and stick it in full blazing sun, you are fighting the plant's own nature. When you plant it shallow in partial shade, you're giving it exactly the room it wants. Here is the science, and it is simple. The rhizome wants warmth, not depth. I keep mine in partial shade, morning light, afternoon shade on my deck, and I watch the soil temperature with my digital thermometer, the same as I do for everything else. I hold it right around 72 degrees. That is the sweet spot. Below 60, the plant sulks and barely moves. Push it up past 90 and the rhizome stalls and the tops scorch. 72, steady, and it runs. Now, here is the part that explains why nobody could ever fully stamp this knowledge out. Ginger propagates vegetatively. Every eye on that rhizome is a potential new plant. You can cut a piece off, and as long as it has one live node, it will grow a whole new hand of ginger. That is why this survived as folk practice even after it disappeared from the catalogues. You cannot kill a plant that regrows from any fragment of itself. People kept passing knobs over the back fence the way they passed tomato seeds, and the method limped along in kitchens and on windowsills, even when no seed company would print a word about it. Now let me give you the numbers, because this is where it stops being a novelty and starts being a supply. I keep records on everything. I have 22 years of notebooks in a Ziploc bag in my garage, and I track this bucket year by year. Year one, that single $2 knob gave me about 1.5 pounds of fresh ginger. Not bad for $2. But year one is not the point. The point is what compounds. Because as that rhizome grows, it pushes upward and outward toward the surface. Remember, it wants to creep horizontally, not dive deep. So every few weeks through the season, as I see the rhizome shouldering up near the top of the bucket, I top dress it. 2 inches of fresh compost right over the exposed rhizome. Then it pushes up into that, and I top dress again. It is the same idea as hilling a potato, except with ginger, you're not chasing more stems. You're giving the rhizome new ground to expand into. That loose mix I mentioned earlier, that is so it can spread without fighting the soil. Year two, after I left the mother piece behind, which I will explain at the end, that same bucket gave me 2.5 to 3 pounds. Year three, with the same top dressing routine, I pulled over 4 pounds out of one bucket. From a $2 knob I bought one time, and the quality is not even comparable to the store. Store ginger is fibrous and shrivels in your drawer. This comes out fresh, plump, low fiber, so tender you can slice it without hitting that woody, stringy texture. It takes 8 to 10 months from sprouting to a full harvest, which here in Black Mountain means I start the bucket indoors in late winter and I'm pulling ginger the following fall. The polytunnel and the garage buy me the shoulder weeks at each end. And in 8 to 10 months of growing it, I have never once seen a modern grow guide mention the top dressing. That single technique is the difference between 1 pound and 4 pounds, and it is the part that quietly vanished. Now here is the comparison that convinced me, because I do not take the old way on faith. I ran it against the modern advice in my testbed style. 2 buckets side by side. One bucket got the full modern treatment. Full sun, planted deep, heavy nitrogen feed, the plan to harvest the whole rhizome at the end of the season. The other got the old method, partial shade, shallow planting, low nitrogen, repeated top dressing, and a piece left behind. The modern bucket looked like the winner for about a month. Full sun, big nitrogen, it threw up tall, lush green tops, gorgeous foliage, the kind of plant that wins a ribbon at the county fair. Then July hit. The soil in that sun bucket spiked to around 90 degrees and the leaf edges scorched brown. And when I tipped it out in fall, under all that beautiful foliage was a small, stunted, disappointing rhizome. All that nitrogen had built leaves. It had not built ginger. That is the same lesson I learned the very first year I ever gardened, back in 2004. 6 tomato plants, 12 tomatoes, because I had dumped high nitrogen lawn food on them and grown enormous plants that would not fruit. Feed the fruit, not the foliage. With ginger, it is feed the rhizome, not the foliage. Same mistake, same fix. The shade bucket, The old method bucket never looked as impressive up top, but the soil stayed near 72. The rhizomes spread fat and wide into all that top dress compost, and it out-yielded the modern bucket better than 2 to 1. The old way won. It was not close, and not one piece of the advice that won that test is what you will find if you search how to grow ginger today. Now, before we keep going, I want to share something with you. If everything I just walked you through is making sense, and you are seeing that the single biggest swing in that whole test was the feeding, that too much nitrogen built leafy tops and a stunted rhizome, then you already understand the core of what I do. Getting the feeding right, phase by phase, is what made that bucket explode in yield. I laid the whole thing out in my book, Steve's 30-Day Maximum Yield Protocol. Chapter 5 is the 3-phase feeding calendar, with a diagram that shows you exactly what to feed at establishment, at flowering, and at fruiting, so you stop guessing and start feeding on the plant's schedule instead of your own. It is written for gardeners who already grow, but know they are leaving yield on the table and want real numbers, not vague advice. It is $17 at stevesgardenbooks.com. If you're watching on your television, go ahead and grab your phone now and point it at the QR code on the screen. Take your time finding it. No rush. I will be right here. If you're on your phone or laptop already, the link is right down in the description. All right, let us keep going, because now I want to come back to the question that bothers me most about all of this. Why did a crop this easy ever stop being a home grow staple? The answer is economics, and it is not complicated. Think about what ginger actually is from a seller's point of view. It is a crop you buy one time for $2 and then perpetuate forever out of a single bucket. You never buy it again. For a trade built entirely on repeat sales, that is the worst product imaginable. Now put yourself in the shoes of the consolidated spice importing houses running out of the Atlantic ports in the early 1900s. Their whole business depended on ginger arriving by ship from Jamaica and from Asia, getting marked up and getting sold again next month. A gardener with a self-refilling bucket on his deck is a customer they lose for life. So as those importers consolidated and tightened their grip on the trade, ginger got quietly reframed. It stopped being a plant you grew next to your potatoes and became a tropical exotic. Something foreign, something you could only ever buy. The home grower instructions simply dropped out of the catalogues. Nobody announced it. They just stopped printing it. Now, I want to be honest with you, because there is a real counter-argument here, and I'm not going to dismiss it. Ginger genuinely does need a long, warm season. It is a true tropical, and you cannot leave it in open ground through a temperate winter. It will rot or freeze every time. That part of the story is true. So the importers were not inventing the difficulty out of thin air. There was a kernel of fact underneath the framing. But here is what they left out. The bucket method neutralizes the entire problem. The bucket gives you the long, warm season because you control the soil temperature, and it gives you the winter survival because you carry it indoors. The one limitation that made ginger look impossible in a place like my Zone 7A here in Black Mountain is the exact limitation a 5-gallon container solves completely. The difficulty was real. The conclusion they let you draw from it was not. And that is the cost to you. For decades, home gardeners who could easily have grown this paid $4, $5, $6 a pound at the store, bought a fresh knob every single time, and tossed the shriveled half they did not use. Not because they could not grow it, because the one instruction that mattered, soak it, plant it shallow, keep it shaded and warm, leave a piece behind, was buried where they would never look for it. Which brings me to that last piece, the one I told you at the start you cannot skip. This is the part that turns one harvest into an endless one, and it is the single most important thing I'm going to tell you today. At harvest, you do not pull the whole hand. Most people, when they dig up that bucket after 8 or 10 months, lift the entire rhizome out, shake off the soil, and take it all inside. That is exactly the mistake. What you do instead is harvest only the outer fingers, the newer, plump, low-fiber sections out at the edges, the good-eating ginger. Then you find the original piece you started with, the mother. It is the older, woodier back section, and you leave it right where it is. You make sure it still has at least 2 or 3 visible growth eyes, those little nodes, attached to it. And you rebury it about 2 inches deep and cover it with fresh compost. Here is the science, and it is the whole reason this works. Ginger propagates vegetatively. It will resprout from any eye on the rhizome. That mother piece is fibrous and frankly not worth eating anyway, so leaving it cost you nothing. You would have thrown it out at the store. But buried in that bucket, every one of those eyes pushes a new shoot next season. The bucket refills itself. You never plant again. One more note for those of us in a real winter. Here in Zone 7A, when the nights start dropping below about 50 degrees, I move the bucket into the garage. The mother does not need light over winter, so it just cannot freeze. Come spring, it warms up and wakes up. And now you see the trap, pulling the whole rhizome, taking every last piece. That is precisely what forces you to go buy a new knob next year. Harvest everything, and you stay a customer forever. All right, before I let you go, everything I just showed you started with one thing: getting the soil right and getting the soil temperature right in that bucket. The light, warm, well-draining mix and that 72-degree trigger are what made it all work. If you're ready to stop guessing and start measuring, Chapter 3 of my book, Steve's 30-Day Maximum Yield Protocol, is the Soil Reset chapter. It walks you through the chemistry of fertility and how I use a soil thermometer as my number one planning indicator, with diagrams that make the whole thing plain. It is built on 22 years of my own recorded data, all 115 pages of it, for $17 at stevesgardenbooks.com. If you're on the television, take a moment, grab your phone, and point it at the QR code on the screen. No hurry, I will wait. If you're already on your phone or laptop, that link is right below in the description. So that is the whole thing. One $2 knob, one bucket, the old shade and shallow method, the modern grow guides, quietly dropped, and pounds of fresh ginger every season for the rest of your life. Now you can grow the one crop the import trade would much rather you kept buying. Your conditions might be different from mine, so do what I always do. Test one bucket this season and see for yourself. And if forgotten methods like this one are your thing, stay tuned, because I have been testing a tomato trick out of a 1943 pamphlet, and it beat the modern advice cold. All right, that's what I have for you today. I'll see you in the next one.